Hello there, guys. At the risk of sounding like every other YouTuber out there, I'd really appreciate it if you'd click the subscribe button. It's free, it doesn't cost you anything, and it allows my channel to grow, which means guests like the one you're about to watch, as well as more, would be willing to come on. Just give it a like, give it a subscribe, and we'll go from there. All right, thank you, and enjoy this episode.
Clements, thank you very much for having me. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm all right. Thank you. So it's been a long time coming. We've had quite a bit of back and forth. So thank you for managing to fit me in. Now, just for the people who are watching and listening who don't know who you are, give us a bit of a brief background.
Yeah, so essentially I was in the police for 10 years. I joined in 2015, left in 2024. And then what I did was, well, the reason why I left was because I got very discontented with the service and the organization. There were quite a few various reasons, things which I think we'll probably get into during the course of our conversation.
Yeah.
But essentially I saw just the complete immorality and the wrong actions and the way the police were conducted themselves. And the people that ultimately suffer, it makes the police force look better, but the people that ultimately suffer are the police officers on the ground, but more importantly, the members of the public who were there supposed to be serving. So I left. I then wrote about my experiences in my book there called The Job's Fucked. That's done quite well. I posted some things on X, which got a bit of traction behind them. And here I am. So that's in a nutshell, mate. I also write crime thrillers too. So before I wrote that, I used to write crime thrillers. I still do write crime thrillers when I was in the job, and I use a lot of my experiences and a lot of things I dealt with as kind of inspiration for that too. So, not all serious, not all whistleblowy kind of expose sort of stuff. A lot of creative stuff as well. I also have a Springer Spaniel called Miles, who I go running around with, and he's currently looking at me because he just heard my name. Just heard his name. So yeah, I'd like to do lots of different things. I get bored quite easily. So what generally happens is I'll kind of fixate on one thing, and then I go, oh, I can do that, and I can do something else. Like I've got marathon training coming up, and I've got an ultra marathon coming up for in the next year, as well as a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, I never seem to sit still. Never seem to sit still for very long, actually.
Excuse me. So you're quite active then still. So I want to ask, because I worked in the health service for nearly 10 years, and obviously you were in the police service. Did you see a slow creep of like politicization in the police?
So when I first joined, we had a chief constable who was very into all the DEI, all the politics, what people describe as quite woke, very left wing. They were very much people were being promoted because of ethnicity, of whether they were, I don't know, their sexual orientation, etc. Less so much from what I saw anyway, rather than the good work they did. It was more of a case that if you were championing and banging this drum over here, then you would get promoted and you would get a lot of praise for it. There was one in particular who I remember when I first started, who went to like an award ceremony, and it was the superintendent who got promoted purely based on the work what they'd done for the LGBT community in the place. Now, okay, that is important, but when we look at actual real day-to-day policing, I'm sure that Mrs. Miggins, who's had her car broken into, who hasn't had any police officer go out and see them, isn't interested in whether a superintendent has put their pronouns in their bio, in their email, etc.
Yeah.
There was always that came in the pronouns, city pronouns, but it was never really rammed down your throat in the sense of you had to do it. It was encouraged, and they put on the Pride Day. They encourage people to wear Pride lanyards. I never had a problem with that in the sense of if people wanted to do it, fine. Firstly, I was like, leave politics out of policing. We shouldn't be politicizing our police force, whether that's left wing or right wing. We shouldn't be doing it. I remember there are clear biases in the service though, because I remember there was a lad who at a rally locked up Tommy Robinson, one of the officers that I knew. They arrested him, and the superintendent who was in charge of my district printed off the photo of Tommy Robinson being arrested and I think he framed it in his office. So it's like, right, okay, so it was clear. There's clear political bias there, isn't there? There's this person who's considered right wing is the devil, and the officers are actually the senior leadership team are actually going to frame it and put it in their office. Whereas when it comes to things like pride and DEI, we're all for that. There was one in particular, actually. Now I think about it, now I'm actually talking about it. There's one in particular. So I did a lot of work surrounding domestic violence. It was something which I was very passionate about. One reason is because I know people that have been through it. Two, I've been through it myself. And three, it's one of those cases where if you can really help somebody, you can dramatically change someone's life. You are essentially taking away a terrorist in that home, in their life, and you're allowing somebody to live their life again. So I went on this very specialist course. It was quite hard to get on this course. It was a new course, but quite specialized. There was a lot of people wanted to go in it, and I managed to get picked for it due to the work and the passion what I had for it. Now, it was a course to do with identifying, controlling coercive behavior. Some people will phrase this as narcissistic abuse or etc. But it's all part of the same thing. It's
Very
all
Richard Grannon.
yeah, exactly. Well, this is it. Just a little side note on that is, people talk about narcissistic abuse and psychopathic abuse, etc. And it's all control and coercive behavior. It's just a populist name for it, but it's just CNC. So I think people need to make that distinction. But I went there to talk about this and to learn. I knew quite a lot anyway because a lot of the own research what I'd done. But the first half of the day was to do with that sort of thing, and it was only of a male versus female. By the way, you never got if a female was the abuser. It was always the male's the problem. So that was always a bit of an issue for me. And then in the afternoon, after we broke for lunch and stuff, the next 3 to 4 hours were all to do with cultural differences, were to do with pronouns. It was to do with what if you're dealing with someone who's transgender, what do you do? And it was you ask them their pronouns, you ask them what their lived experience is. So the definite creep when it comes to the politicization of the organization was certainly there, even when dealing with such serious things such as domestic abuse. So with that, we're only giving the officers who are there the specialist training for half of the day. The rest of it is to do with DEI. The rest of it is to do with pronouns and, cultural differences in the sense of, well, what if you're dealing with a Muslim family or an African family or a family where it's much more patriarchal, where the woman doesn't have equal rights. I remember thinking about that. I remember thinking, it doesn't matter the cultural differences. If it's illegal in our country and it breaks our law, then that's what we need to focus on.
Yeah.
Because we have specialist units which will deal. Say if it's like an honor-based crime, for example, it was like an Islamic family. There is a specialist unit which will deal with that. Right, me there and then, right in front of me, I need to be able to identify, is this a crime? I don't need to identify, okay, well, we think it's a crime, but based on their culture, this is how it would. No, the two things don't coexist. There's one law in this country, and that's British law. So, in answer to your question, it certainly started creeping in. There was certainly parts where it was much more prevalent than others. I'd say day to day, not particularly, but there was definitely that underlying creep of the, like I said, like the left wing ideology sort of creeping in. There was also one where they needed more firearms officers because people weren't going for firearms. And he opened up the recruitment to firearms, but only for women. So it wasn't, so if I was a man and I wanted to join the firearms unit, I wouldn't be allowed to join for a period of time because he wanted to encourage. Well, they would class it as positive discrimination because they want to fulfill the quota. And again, if there's a terrorist attack, I couldn't give a shit whether the person's holding that gun, shooting that terrorist, is a man or a woman. All I care about is can they do the job? So I think the force got in a bit of shit for that because they were like, this is sexist. If it was men only, well, we only want men for this period of time, they'd have been absolute uproar. But because it's female, we only want females in, then that's considered acceptable because, well, if you look on the left wing thing, men, in particular white men, are both the oppressors in society and but they're both the oppressors in society, but are also pieces of shit, and we shouldn't hire them, and everyone hates them. So the two kind of coexist at the same time. That kind of dichotomy, that disparity between power and influence, but also you're a piece of shit. So yeah, I know it's quite a few things. The more thing about it, so yeah, no, it's more a few things. But yeah, like I said, organization that it was creeping in, but day to day, you wasn't rammed down your throat as much.
No, I did see that in the health service, but I wanted to get your opinion as well, because you're a man that's been through it. I spoke to Peter Blexley, former Met detective, and he's not a fan of the College of Policing, in any way, shape, or form. What's your opinion of the College of Policing?
So the College of Policing was brought. I didn't have much of an opinion on them because, I mean, the training you get shit. The training they put forward isn't practicable. Because it's PowerPoint and it's this thing called NCALT. So it's this standardized internet video learning platform. And even when you get somebody coming in talking to you and teaching you based on the College of Policing, it's a lot of it's like obscure things. It's nothing really practicable. It's like you're learning about an obscure piece of law or some anagram of a situation which you might never encounter. You need to learn about the day-to-day police. You need to learn how to get a victim to open up properly. You need to learn how to properly defend yourself. You need to be able to how to properly communicate with people. That stuff you kind of it's all where you learn on a job for that. Well, no, that's the thing what needs to be taught properly. College of Policing as an organization. So I spoke to somebody from the College of Policing for the next book I'm writing. And I had a lot of these preconceived ideas that they were left wing, that they were politically captured and everything else. They said that that wasn't necessarily the case. They said that there was certainly political ideology in there. For example, this particular person, I think they worded an email a little bit strongly, and they were asked to go on a course which would train them on how to properly speak to people and respond to people in an email which isn't abrasive. It's like, all right, so you're training me how to speak then, basically.
Yeah.
The difficulty is so the College of Peace was brought in to create a standardized version of policing. So all policing is fair and equal and standardized across the board. The difficulty is the college can put forward whatever training they want or put in whatever requirements or policies they want and they believe needs to be implemented, but the chief constable doesn't have to implement them. So the College of Policing, from what this person was telling me, is a bit of a toothless tiger. They can say, we don't want you investigating non-crime hate incidents. We don't want you to do this. We want you to do this, this, and this instead. But the officers in charge of the organization, depending on what constabulary you're at, they don't have to follow up. So I think if the College of Policing had a bit more power in the sense of going, we're enforcing this and you have to do what we say, we'd see a lot more standardization across the board, which could be a good or bad thing depending which way the college leans.
Yeah.
I think the degree program is an absolute waste of time. I've not met anybody who's completing, is currently undergoing, or has completed the degree program who has said it's benefited them in any way. I did just under 10 years. I've got A levels at best, never went to university, never done a degree in my life. I'd like to think I was quite good at my job. A lot of very, very good officers I worked with had never done a degree, there were people from normal backgrounds. Maybe some were ex-army, maybe some joined a little bit later on in life, maybe some joined straight out of high school or college, and they learned on the job and they were very good and very robust at what they did. The issue as well with the degree program is that you get your probation extended for a year. So typical probation period is 2 years. Someone in the degree program, it's 3 years. During that 3-year period, you are expected to not only police and do everything else what you're meant to do as a police officer, as the shift work, the accumulation of trauma, of PTSD, of the workloads and the stresses of the job. On top of that, you're expected to do a degree too. So that puts more pressures on the officers doing the degree.
Yeah.
Then there is also the issue of the team. So if you have a team of 10, for example, and 2 people are students, for so many months a year, those two students are not going to be available to come to work because they're going to be off at university studying for the degree, which means that on paper, it looks like that block has 10 officers, but in reality, they have 8. And that's not even 8 operational, because then there's hidden demand as well, which is another thing which we get into. But the officers then have to carry that extra burden, because it's not only carrying extra burden in the sense of demand, as in calls, what they have to respond to, but also crimes and workload as well. Because the officers are away at university, they're not able to have access to their workload, which means that maybe I then have to do this other officer's work as well as my own. So, and there's also a little bit of an insidious part of it too, in that some people join, they know that being a police officer looks really good on a CV, so they join for 3 years, get a free degree, get it paid for. They don't have to pay for it because it's paid for by the organisation, and then they also get paid to work as well. Once the degree's finished, they go, I actually really, really don't like this anymore. Thanks to the free degree, I'm despairing. There's a few people do that too. Then you've got me started now. You can't give us so much down with it. Then there's also the demographic of people that join, in that a lot of them are criticised for being not no life experience, because mate, I don't know you was like at 18. I was a fucking idiot at 18. I remember I didn't know I didn't know my ass on my elbow. If you tell me that, oh, you're now a police officer, you know, I wouldn't have had a clue on what to do. So you're attracting the wrong kind of people into the job too, and you're also alienating people who might be very, very good at being a bobby, but who may not be academically strong. You may not be able to, or feel confident enough to do a degree. If you've got someone who's been in the army for the past 15 years who wants to join the police, he'd probably make a very, very good cop, but they've been out of the education for 15, 20 years. So why are they going to go? So it's an additional blocker in the way. So College of Policing as a whole, I think the degree program, get rid. I think the College of Policing, if it was standardized and it worked, what their policies were, would be a good thing if they had the ability to actually implement what they wanted to do. So a bit of a mixed answer. Honestly, I'm a bit on the fence about them. Overall, if I had to make a decision, I'd say bad, like get rid of it. But I can see why they were brought in. It's just not working properly.
Why do cops need to have degrees? If he doesn't graduate program, like why are they putting everyone through it, or as many people?
Yes, that's the answer, mate. They don't need a degree for years and years and years. You've not needed a degree to be a bobby, and for some reason you now need a degree. And I don't know whether it's to try and bolster up the quality of officers, but you don't learn being a cop in the classroom. You learn being a cop out on the street, or you learn from people that are more experienced from you. You learn by going and dealing with incidents, speaking to the public, investigating crimes. That's how you learn. That's how you learn to speak to people. That's how you learn whether somebody's perhaps lying to you. That's how you learn about use of force, really, and you know what you can and can't do. And that's how you build a good relationship on a block, on a group of officers, is that camaraderie. You don't learn that in a classroom. The classroom's sterile, and even when it comes to your personal safety training, they do the best they can, because you can't actually properly hit each other. But I know there's forces out there in other countries where they are much more strict with the fitness test, with the personal safety training. I believe in Canada there's a force or a regiment of the police where to get into it, as well as doing all your strikes, your baton strikes, and everything else. You have to go into a room which is completely dark, and there's flashing strobe lights, and there's loud music playing, and you have to fight off 5 instructors who are all black belts, and you have to see how long they can last. There's none of that happens here. In fact, I heard a story recently where some probationers in a classroom during their training got their, what was it? It was something stupid. They managed to complain to whoever about their supervisor or their teacher because they maybe said something they didn't like, or they swore something, and it offended somebody, so they managed to that person and got reprimanded for it. Now, it's fucking ridiculous. And just talking about the College of Policing again, mate, the they're now putting in they're now putting in trigger warnings on videos. I'm assuming you know what trigger warning is?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So people don't know, a trigger warning is basically a warning to say, warning, this contains blah, you may find it offensive or you may find it upsetting. I remember sitting there near the end of my service because I was going to go on some, again, specialist training, how to train some people in DA. And I remember sitting there and this video came up and it said, warning, this was a course about domestic abuse. And the video warning came up and said, warning, this video contains arguing, contains scenes people might find upsetting. Like, I watched it. The actors are not going to win anything. The actors are not going to win any awards for their fucking acting. Like, they weren't the best. And it was very chill. It wasn't anything bad at all. I've seen much worse watching daytime TV or watching Netflix. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it.
And they needed a trigger warning. And I remember sitting there like, if you can't handle a video in a controlled environment, how the shit are you going to go to an incident where a woman's screaming at you, crying, she's got her face blooded, and there's the boyfriend over there who's coked off his tits and has just kicked 7 shades of shit out of her, and guess what? You're next, and you've got to stop him. I'm all for people after an incident having a bit of decompression time. Perhaps the officer has been through DA, perhaps they've been a victim of sexual assault or whatever in the past. That can't stop you from going to those incidents and prevent you from doing your job. If you need some decompression time afterwards, absolutely fine. But if you can't watch a video, and I believe there was another one, I believe when you're talking about Peter Blacksey, I remember I saw an interview with him and he said that he saw this, or he was told about this, is that there was a video, a module to do with stalking and harassment, and on that video there was a button what you could press if you felt overwhelmed, and it would take you to like a breathwork thing. It's like, nah, that should be a trap. If you press that button, that should be like, no, you're gone. Because I've dealt with many stalking incidents. I've dealt with tons of violent crime, all sorts of stuff. I've held in people's intestines when they've been stabbed at a roadside. I've given CPR. You know, I've been to some horrific murders and stood there and seen God. I know what brains look like. You know what I mean? So, if nobody, I wouldn't have felt better going to those instances if I had a trigger warning. You have to deal with it. And like I said, if after that instance happened, you find this ruminating over it, you're thinking about it quite a bit, you kind of can't move on from it. Okay, seek help, speak to somebody. You're not a robot, but you have to be able to deal with that sort of stuff and maybe decompress afterwards. So yeah, trigger warnings are fucking ridiculous thing what they're bringing in now. Absolutely ridiculous.
The quality of the officers coming through, if they're being exposed to trigger warnings for, challenging circumstances, let's call it. What about the quality of the people coming through? Are they just not suitable, not viable?
So in my experience, a lot of the officers that came through, they would fit into 2 categories. Either they would leave quite quickly because it got a bit too much for them quite soon, or they would be very, very good. So I've worked with some cops who were like 18, 19, absolutely brilliant officers, really, really, really good, really switched on, they're good at what they did. I feel that they would have joined and made good cops irrespective of whether there was a degree program or not. I think they would have joined anyway and they would have done really well. Other officers were generally not as robust as you would like to think. When things got quite stressful, sometimes they would crumble a little bit. I only saw a bit of that because near the end of my career, I stepped away from direct front line, so I didn't see that as much.
Yeah.
But that's just anecdotally. But from things were off, because I get so many cops messaging me, so many sergeants, inspectors, and the consensus is the same. The new recruits coming through now aren't robust enough. They're not good enough. They're unfit. They crumble. They can't take any kind of criticism off their supervisor. At incidents, they're not. For example, there was one where there was a domestic incident. A trainer who had about 4 or 5 years in attended with a student. The student was fresh out the box, brand new. The student and the officer went to this domestic incident, and the offender came outside and started attacking the trainer. The trainer was then shouting for help, and he turned around and he saw that the trainee, the new officer, had ran, locked herself in the car, and then was shouting up for assistance rather than getting out and helping their officer. Even if that's just the one, that's one too many. And that officer got quite seriously injured as a result of that. There has to be things out there to make it much more robust when it comes to joining the cops. But the problem is, mate, is that because there's so many people leaving the service, there's so many cops leaving, they're not going to put in additional blockers. They're not going to make it harder for people to join. If anything, they're going to relax the criteria of people to enter because they need to bolster up the numbers. So whereas before, if somebody wasn't good enough, they wouldn't get in. Now they're letting them in because they need the numbers. I will say one thing in relation to my old horse. When I first joined, there was a girl there who she failed her personal safety trainer. So she wasn't. So you go through drills. So you do all your safety training, you go through drills, basically your assessment, and to see one-on-one under pressure, can you fight off an instructor in a controlled way? And it was nerve-wracking, it's quite scary, but you just go, right, okay, you're going into it. That officer didn't pass that, and she actually wasn't able to continue with the training, and she didn't get the job. I like that, because that shows to me, yes, you could have let her in, but by letting her in, you could also put a lot of people at risk. And not just her, not just people at risk, but her at risk as well, and members of the public at risk. I think that because of the police retention crisis we're now having, that will now be less, that's going to happen less. And just when I say that, I was remembering some other things. So there were officers who would get to the end of their 10 weeks and they would, so when you come out of training school, you're in 10 weeks in company. So you have 10 weeks with an officer and they kind of train you how to be, you're in company, train you live on the job. There were a lot of officers who would say that their new recruits needed more conflict training because they didn't like going to conflicts, or they wouldn't want to go to a sudden death, for example. It's like, well, no, that's part of the job. There was one officer who point blank refused to go to domestic violence incidents because she'd been through it herself. It doesn't work like that. You're the person they're calling for help. If you can't deal with that sort of stuff, then you don't put on that uniform, or you find a different role away from it. So, I mean, I could sit here and I could slag off new recruits. There are a lot of very good new recruits. There are a lot of bad new recruits. I think the system is not set up in a way, due to the issues in the system, set up to help those officers to succeed. And because the officers who shouldn't get in are getting in due to the retention crisis, this then gives new recruits a bad name. But I think the issue is, like I said, the degree program. You're attracting a much younger, inexperienced demographic into the service, which perhaps are not as robust enough or prepared in it, simply because of their age. And a lot of them probably still live with the parents, of the hard life and the hard things you have to deal with as a cop.
So, moving on slightly from that, what is an average day in the life of a cop? What's it like? So you get up, go to the station, then what?
Funny enough, it's not as exciting as you think. So when I got there, I was surprised by the amount of things you deal with that isn't crime related. The police deal with everything. Everything. If there is for example, if someone goes missing, it's the police that are out there looking for them. If there's a neighbor dispute, some people arguing, the police go there and deal with it. If somebody is in custody, or they've been arrested and then they fall ill, or they say that they swallowed drugs and they are feeling ill as a result, the police have to go and sit with them in hospitals. So a lot of the police's time is spent on hidden demand. So looking for missing people, sitting in hospital with people for hours on end, sometimes days, depending what they're saying's up with them, sitting in custody with people. So someone's been arrested, they say they're going to harm themselves. The custody sergeant doesn't want to leave them on their own, unsupervised. an officer then has to sit at that door, the cell door with them, until such a time they either get released or the custody sergeant says that they're fit to be left on their own. There's appointments, there's more the slow pace of stuff. Not when I joined the police, I thought everything would be like 999 calls. You know, you're flying around blue lights and you're dealing with your job to job to job. Obviously, you do get days like that where it's chaos, but a lot of the day-to-day stuff that you deal with, and a lot of the paperwork. Oh my God, there's so much paperwork involved. Like case files, and even for quite simple incidents such as, you know, where I had a shoplifting, there's like 9 to 10 different forms you have to fill out for that. If you have to do anything that needs to go to Crown Court, you're talking unbelievable amounts of material, so much evidence you have to put forward. And it's not the case of the evidence, it's the documentation what has to go with the evidence. There's so much repeating yourself, so much duplication of work. They actually brought something in which streamlined a lot of it, and someone got promoted off the back of it. But then the next person went, oh, we don't want to do that anymore because, you know, whatever reason. So then it got stripped away. So then the full thing came back. There's so much paperwork. There's so many case files. There's so much hidden demand. When you deal with crime, it's not often I say it's not often. It's not a lot of your time is taken up not dealing with crime, and a lot of it as well is mental health related too. So if someone brings up the police and if someone rings up 999 and says, I'm going to kill myself, it's the police that go. It's not often an ambulance, because a police car is faster and there are more of them than ambulances. And it's cheaper to send a police car. So then the police officer might be sat with someone who says they're going to kill themselves in their home until an ambulance arrives, or they can get someone else to sit with them. You could be there hours. You could be there hours and hours. So that's another resource which has been tied up. Or people on the bridge. You know, someone says they're going to jump off a bridge. It's the police that go. The police have to talk them off the bridge and then take him to a secure unit. They could have someone who's been sectioned and they're now in the secure unit awaiting your bed. They could be there for a day or two. Officers have to sit with them. There's so much what police officers do which people just don't hear about. And there's so much which police officers do which is a complete drain on the officers' time and the resources too. And I say drain as in the sense of it's not crime, it's not important, because people having a mental health crisis is obviously important. We need to look after those people, but it's not the job, in my opinion, the job of the police. He's there to deal with crime and public order rather than a medical issue like a mental health issue. But then you can look at, well, the NHS is in absolute crisis anyway. So the NHS aren't going to send loads of people, or the mental health support services are strapped. You know, so
when I was there, and I was there for nearly 10 years. Working.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine, mate.
So just to, and I know you give me quite a bit of your time today, and I really appreciate you fitting me in, and I'm quite busy. So why is the job fucked?
That's a question. That's $1 million question. It's fucked for quite a few reasons, mate. The main reason why I think it's fucked is, one, because they don't treat officers with respect, in the sense of it's easier for an officer to resign than for them to try and keep officers. Officers get treated like shit. They get treated like shit, not just off the public. You kind of expect it off the public because a lot of them are your customers, aren't they? You know, but the people who you come into contact with don't like you. The majority of times you're dealing with people, they probably don't like the police. They dealt with the police quite a few times. That's standard. You get used to that. The issue is when the organization cares more about statistics rather than the people out there dealing with things. What I found was when it came to, so the police have something called a code of ethics, which you have to adhere to. And part of that code of ethics is honesty and integrity. Essentially, you have to be an honest person and you have to have an integral part of yourself in order to be a bobber. A lot of people get fired or get dismissed because they breached honesty and integrity in some kind of way. But the organization itself is incredibly dishonest and does not have integrity, because they stamp all over officers for the sake of people's promotions. The policing is run like a business. It's not run like a public organization, public institution. We're there to serve the public and is there to protect the officers who are out there risking their lives every day for the people who, you know, for all these people. People are seen as stats on a spreadsheet. the amount of unlawful arrests I saw when I was in the job, because an officer will attend an incident, they will then be given a quota, a stats amount what they have to hit of so many arrests every month, so many stop searches, so many traffic tickets, so many intelligence reports. By the very nature of that, that then leads to a bending and a stretching of justification in order to arrest somebody. So if I go to an incident and I'm looking at this going, if I have enough arrests, I'm probably going to go, well, they don't need to be arrested. We could deal with this another way. The justification is not there. If I don't want arrest, I'm probably going to go, yeah, they're definitely coming in because I need the arrest. Not because it's justified or proportionate or the right thing to do. Well, I need the arrest. So what we're doing, for the sake of statistics, and this is also benefits someone above that, the officer, majority of the time, doesn't want to make this arrest. They don't want to do it. But we're asking officers to both uphold their morality and uphold their integrity, but bend it when it comes to the wills and wants of the organisation and potentially make someone's life worse as a result of being arrested. Like, being arrested is an absolute awful thing. I've been locked up before. It was fucking awful.
Yeah, me too.
I know. Yeah, it's not a nice thing to happen to you. But what's happening is because these officers are arresting so many people, they're going, well, it's just an allegation. Yeah, and I've even heard Cox goes, don't worry, it's not going to go anywhere. You'll be out in the morning. It's like, well, why are you arresting them then? If you know the job's not going to go anywhere, okay, sometimes there can be an immediate safeguarding concern. Sometimes you have to take that person away. You know it's not going to go anywhere, but that's the right thing to do in that situation. There's no other alternative. That's what you have to do. I understand that. And sometimes you can arrest somebody with the best intentions of progressing a case, but it can fall through for whatever reason. Totally get that. It's happened loads of times to me. But the issue is when we're arresting someone for a statistic, a tick in the box, we are seeing people as ticks in a box rather than people who have their own individual situations and circumstances, and it's all to benefit someone else above them. It makes the cops feel alienated from their work because you're taking the You're taking the authority away from them, their own view over their work. I'm trying to think of the word, but their ability to make their own decisions. Autonomy, that's the one. There we go. You're taking the officers' autonomy away from them, which then demoralizes officers. You are the organization does not give a shit about police officers' mental health. They say they do, but what they do is they will put on a mental health day, for example, or they'll put you have to fill in this online questionnaire, or there's a well-being band comes around every now and day to day. They don't care. I know plenty of officers who have been on severely struggling with the mental health due to a myriad of incidents they've dealt with. And it's like, okay, you could go off sick, but if you go off sick, you probably get put on an action plan. And if you go on an action plan, then you might lose your job in the future. So don't go off. Or when people are off, they're getting berated by their supervisors saying, when you're coming back, we need you. Your team's struggling.
Yeah.
Everyone's burnt out. We need you. So that can depend on the individual force, of course, but from my own experience and the things that I've seen, it's quite force-wide. And I can understand from an organisational perspective, in the sense if they can't have all the workforce off sick, otherwise the workforce won't work properly. So they need to try and get people back in, and they need to try and encourage people to stay as much as possible. However, the pay has been cut by 21% in real terms since 2010. There are less officers now more than ever. Despite what fucking the government say, more officers are leaving, less people want to join. The job's in an absolute state of disarray. Police officers are not given the tools and the support to make their own decisions. A lot of the time, they're attending an incident with their sergeant or their inspector in their ear saying, when you get there, we are low on domestic arrests this month. Make sure you come back with an arrest. Before they even got to the incident and assessed it. So the actual decision-making has gone out the officer's autonomous window. Then the mental health support isn't there for when officers are being burnt out. There's not enough staff, so officers are getting more burnt out. There's then so much pressure on officers to not go off or to return when they are burnt out. Officers are being disciplined if they don't do what the organisation wants. There's a myriad of different things which all put in together. You can't just point to one thing and go, no, this is the problem. It's a system organisational wide fuck up, which has happened because we are promoting the wrong people. We are promoting people based off how they make the organization look rather than how they make officers feel, how they make officers feel secure and happy in their job, how supported they feel. And also, the primary thing is the service to the public. How do the public view the police? I know people now who say, I got held up at knife point, or a friend of mine had their car stolen, or we was out. I was speaking to somebody recently and they said, my friend was a victim of violent crime while we was out. We didn't ring the police because they're not going to bother. So public faith in the police is massively lost. So yes, on one side, we can say that the police look better on paper because we've improved our arrest by this much or improved this statistic. But in actual real terms, you can't manipulate stats and figures and then say you're doing a good job where public satisfaction and faith in the police has dropped so much when less people are joining. Retention's an absolute nightmare. Even people who are staying are not happy. The Police Federation recently released something and said like 90% of officers said they have low morale. 90% of the workforce say that they are not happy with what they're doing. So
It's really bad.
how the hell do we have a functioning system? And we need cops. We need, for a functioning, safe, secure society, we need police officers. And not only that, mate, is that when somebody puts in a lot of effort and gets a really good case through, a serious case of, whatever, they manage to get it in front of the courts giving shit all anyway. They get nothing at court anyway. So the officers put in all the work, they keep people on side. Again, it's everything else, all the stress they manage to finally get somebody in front of a judge and the judge gives them fuck all. So it's like, well, so even when we do everything right, they get nothing. So what's the point? And just going back to pay, if you want to encourage people to join the police, you need to pay them more. So I know a lady who was in the police for 3 years, didn't like it, and she left. She went and got a job as a supervisor at Home Bargains, and she was on the same money. So she's on the same money. She's not working nights. She gets her evenings and weekends to herself. She's not being spat at. She's not being recorded. She's not being assaulted. She's not having the scrutiny of professional standards on her every second of every day in case she sends an email which is a bit mean, or she says something in the office in passing which somebody finds offensive. Even when you're off work, even when you're not in work, you have to be careful about what you say and do, because if somebody reports you or someone sees something, your conduct outside of work can bring the force into disrepute. So you've always got this thing on your shoulder of you are always being watched. And that's stressful to people because they're censoring their own lives too. So, yeah, lots of reasons. Give it the chopped foot, mate.
No, it seems like it. It seems like it. Hopefully, we can hope things will improve in the future. I guess it all comes down to who gets into Parliament next.
I think scrapping the PCC is a good thing. That's come out recently, that Labour are scrapping the PCC because it means that there's less direct influence of politics into the police sense. Because policing shouldn't be political, it needs to be apolitical. It's the only way it can work. To treat everyone fairly, and to get rid of allegations of two-tier police and everything else. The police force needs to be able to operate itself without the influence of politics. So I think that's good.
Absolutely. I've always been of the opinion, if you are in any of the emergency services, whether it be firefighting, police, NHS, whatever, when you're at work, you are apolitical, regardless of how you vote, what you think of DEI or anything else. When you're at work, you are apolitical. I'm not a fan of rainbow police cars or rainbow lanyards or anything like that. If you want to do that to your own car in your own time, fine. But when you're a bobby, or when you're in the NHS, or when you're a firefighter, that's the focus. You fight fires, you help people, you save people. I've never understood, even when I was in the NHS and I saw this thing sort of creep in, like the rainbow lanyards. And I remember having a conversation with someone when I worked in the NHS. And I sort of said, well, the way I see it is like you're divvying us all up into boxes. You've got like an LGBT society, as it was then, and a BAME society, black and minority ethnic, and a woman's society. Nothing for straight white men, just to put that in there.
No, you're the devil.
Isn't that dividing us? And I said, isn't that dividing us? And they were like, no, people want to be with people like themselves. It was like, no,
Yes, be inclusive.
over there. Shouldn't we just be a melting
The pathfinder is what it's called.
just be.
It's your LGBT, your BAME, you're this, you're that. That it's fucking apartheid, but it's segregation, but it's segregation under the guise of compassion. She's weaponized empathy, she's weaponized compassion. And funny enough, when these organizations get a bit of heat for it, they don't stand up and go, no, we believe in this, we're going to do it. They go, all right, okay, we'll pull it away. It's all virtue signaling bullshit. It doesn't benefit anybody but the organization. Fucking get rid of it. It's ridiculous.
I would imagine the NHS black hole, as it's called, would be significantly smaller if they did away with all of these politicization classes, DEI classes, all that. And I imagine it'd be the same in the police. The budget would go up because you wouldn't be paying for these things. But it seems like policing is fucked from your perspective. The NHS is fucked from my perspective. We need to get a firefighter on that.
I know, right? Exactly.
That's it. It's like Pokemon. We've got to catch them all, mate.
That's it, mate.
That's it. Jay, thank you for your time.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed myself. Cheers, mate.
Brilliant. Thank you.